Welcome to my painting a fall leaf in watercolor. I am Lynn Pratt and I will guide you through this to show you how to paint a leaf in watercolor. I use all Holbein watercolor paints and Holbein gold brushes, and I use Gemini 300-pound paper. I started by adding a wash of clear water over the leaf that I'm going to start with, just adding it to the center and right up to the edges. You want to make sure you don't go over your edge lines, because everywhere you have water, the watercolor paint will flow into. I started with a wash of the two yellows that I'm using, adding them and blending them right into the water, and added some of the lighter red right into the yellow so it naturally blends right into the water. I then added the darker red on top of the lighter red to add some of those darker parts of the leaf, making sure I know where the leaf veins are and where I want to keep my lights light. I did a mixture of my permanent alizarin crimson and added some burnt sienna and ultramarine light into it to darken up that red even more for the super dark spots. You have to be careful when you're mixing green with red, because they are contrasting colors and they will naturally dull each other out. So when you're using those two, you want to make sure that you don't blend them together, because your leaf will look dull in those areas. I use a border of yellow before I add my red so that my green and red don't mix onto the wet paper. I'm adding darker areas around the veins of the leaf to make sure that I get all those smaller details in on a wet wash, but then I can go back over it once it's dry and add the fine details in on top of the dry paint. So keep in mind, while it's wet, your colors are going to naturally blend together, but once you let that bottom layer dry, you can go back in and add some more details on top. All of the fine details don't have to be in that first wet on wet wash. I'm going back with a small scrub brush and just using clear water to get rid of the little areas that might have gone outside of my lines where I wanted them. Once that's dry, I'll go back and add some more detail on top of the painting to add the veins and burn marks or little holes in the leaf or anything else to make it look a little more realistic. I'm doing all of this with that dark red mixture that I made using the permanent alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, and ultramarine light. Once I have all of the details how I want them in the leaf, I let it dry completely before I start the shadow. For the shadow, I used an even mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine light to come up with a gray color. It's a nice neutral gray that you can easily make more blue or more brown by adding more or less of one of the colors. I have my 300-pound cold press paper stapled down to a foam core board. That makes it easy so I can rotate my painting around while I'm working on it. This makes it much easier to make shadows and small lines so that my hand is at the right angle. If I tape it down to my table, I wouldn't be able to move it around like that. I'm using that darker mixture of the red to do my stem, and then adding all the little details in on the leaf and lifting where I need to. Once I'm done, I'll let it dry completely before I start with the shadow. For the shadow, I'm using that mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine light. This is a great color to use for shadows, and I'm also adding some burnt sienna in to the wet paint right around the base of the leaf to kind of give it that reflection of brightness that is under the leaf when it hits the table. So it gives a little more of a dynamic look to the shadow instead of just being a flat gray. When I'm doing my shadow, I'm careful to do each area at a time and make sure it's a nice, smooth shadow. You do not want it to dry partway through or bleed because your shadow will not look realistic. It has to be one even wash for the entire area. Going around the leaf, my areas of shadow are only small, so it's easy to do them all at once with paint right onto the dry paper. If I'm doing a painting where the shadow is much larger, I'll usually wet that whole area of paper first and then add my shadow color so that it's a nice, smooth, even wash. I'm making sure to keep my paint mixed so that when I'm adding the shadow, it's a nice even tone all the way around the leaf in all the different areas to make sure that it looks realistic. You don't want one part to be really blue and one part to be really brown. Now all of my shadow parts are in and all my details are on my leaf, and I just let it dry and sign my name. I hope you enjoyed this video of painting a fall leaf in watercolor, and will join me for future videos or check out my website at lyndpratt.com. Thanks a lot.